My mother knocked on my door after 19 years of silence. She came not to apologize, but to beg me to save her reputation. They kicked me out, claiming my electrician husband ruined my future. 19 years later, a failing grid at their namesake hospital nearly destroyed their legacy. The only man who can prove the truth is the one they despised. This is no reunion. It is about forged signatures, and a door I finally close. I am Phoebe Hayes. The rain came down in sheets that night, hammering against the roof of our small house in Ashford, South Carolina. Like a fist demanding entry, it was the kind of storm that swallowed the streetlights and turned the roads into black rivers. Inside, my phone was vibrating so violently against the kitchen counter that it threatened to rattle right off the edge. Notifications were exploding across the screen. A relentless cascade of text messages, news alerts, and social media tags. The local news stations were broadcasting live, and the shaky, chaotic footage was already going viral across every platform. It was a total grid failure. A massive power outage had plunged an entire medical complex into darkness. As the camera panned across the chaotic exterior, illuminated only by the frantic flashing of ambulance sirens and the strobing lightning above, I saw the sleek, modern letters mounted on the brick facade, the Whitmore Children's Pavilion. It was the brand-new, state-of-the-art pediatric wing. It was also the building that bore the name of my biological family, the family I had not spoken to, looked at, or accepted a single dime from in exactly 19 years. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. Then, a second video surfaced on a local journalist's feed. This one was shot from inside the belly of the hospital, down in the concrete and steel labyrinth of the utility sub-basement. The emergency backup lights cast harsh, sickly green shadows over a panicked maintenance crew, but standing in the center of the frame, directing the chaos, with a voice that cut cleanly through the panic, was my husband, Mason Hayes, a master electrician, a man who wore his calluses like badges of honor. He had his hard hat pushed back, a heavy-duty flashlight clamped in his teeth, his hands moving with practiced, desperate precision inside a massive open electrical cabinet. He was barking orders, orchestrating a manual transfer of power to keep the life support systems in the neonatal intensive care unit from flatlining. The media was already spinning the narrative. The headlines scrolling at the bottom of the feed were calling Mason the hero of the hour, the rogue electrician who happened to be on site for an adjacent building and stepped in to save the pediatric ward from a catastrophic tragedy. But as I watched the footage loop for the third time, my breath caught in my throat. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the grainy image, my thumb shaking against the glass, behind Mason's shoulder, clearly visible in the harsh glare of the utility lights, was the main transfer switchboard. I recognized the manufacturer's logo. I recognized the specific gray casing and the layout of the breakers. It was the exact model. It was the precise piece of equipment Mason had warned them about years ago. The very system he had sworn would cause a catastrophic failure if pushed under the load of a modern medical facility. Mason never worked for them. At least, that is the story they want the whole city to believe. A cold dread settled heavily in my stomach. Heavier than the humidity of the Carolina storm outside, the narrative of the brave, passing hero was a convenient illusion. The reality was a buried secret that was currently sparking and smoking in the basement of my family's legacy. I moved quickly. I walked through our modest living room, turning off the lamps, plunging our own house into preemptive darkness. I flipped the deadbolts on the front door and the back patio. I drew the heavy curtains tight, sealing us off from the street. Outside, the rain continued to lash against the siding, but I could already see the faint, sweeping headlights of vehicles slowing down near our driveway. The local press had undoubtedly connected the dots. The heroic electrician had a name, an address, and a wife with a maiden name that was currently plastered across the failing hospital. The back door rattled, and I jumped. A key turned in the lock. Delilah, our 19-year-old daughter, pushed her way inside, wrestling with a soaking wet umbrella and a heavy canvas duffel bag. She had driven back from her college dormitory for the weekend, navigating the treacherous roads of the storm. She dropped her bag on the linoleum, her boots leaving muddy puddles, and immediately stopped. She looked at the darkened house. She looked at me, standing rigidly by the living room window, peering through a tiny slit in the fabric. Delilah had inherited her father's sharp, observant eyes and my absolute refusal to ignore the elephant in the room. She pulled her wet hair away from her face, her expression tightening into a mask of apprehension. She had seen the feeds. "Is grandmother involved in this?" Delilah asked. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of anxiety. She knew the broad strokes of our history. She knew the name Whitmore was a ghost that haunted the edges of our lives. I did not answer her. I could not bring myself to speak the words. I just kept my eyes locked on the front gate, watching the rain bounce off the asphalt. The silence in our dark living room stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the glass. Then, a sound cut through the noise of the rain. It was not the jarring electronic chime of the doorbell. It was a knock. 3 slow, deliberate, and impossibly firm strikes against the solid wood of our front door. It was a sound that instantly sent a shard of ice straight down my spine. It lacked the hesitation of a reporter or the casual rhythm of a neighbor. It was a knock of pure, unadulterated entitlement. It was a knock that expected the door to open simply because it had demanded it. I had not heard that exact cadence in 19 years. But my body remembered it instantly. The muscle memory of fear and subjugation flared up in my chest. I gestured for Delilah to stay back in the hallway. I crept silently toward the entryway, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. I reached the small window beside the door and carefully, using just my index finger, pulled the edge of the curtain back a fraction of an inch. The porch light was off, but a flash of lightning illuminated the scene in stark, monochrome clarity. Standing on my porch, with the rain blowing sideways and soaking the shoulders of her impeccably tailored designer coat, was Dr. Evelyn Whitmore, my mother. She was not seeking shelter. She stood perfectly straight, her jaw set, clutching a thick manila envelope tightly against her chest to protect it from the downpour. She had not come to see her daughter. She had come to negotiate a surrender. The memory of the last time I saw her tore through my mind with the violence of a physical blow. It was 19 years ago. The setting was not a dark porch, but the blindingly bright, suffocatingly opulent dining room of the Whitmore estate in the wealthiest zip code of the city. I was 19 years old. I was also exactly 6 months pregnant. The swelling of my stomach could no longer be hidden by clever tailoring or heavy sweaters. The secret was out, resting heavily beneath the silk fabric of my evening dress, a glaring offense to the crystal chandeliers and the imported mahogany table. Dinner had been an excruciating exercise in silent judgment until my father, Dr. Grant Whitmore, the city's most revered cardiovascular surgeon, carefully placed his silver fork down on his bone china plate. The faint clink was deafening. He did not look at my face. He looked at my midsection. He commanded me to stand up. I pushed my chair back. The heavy oak legs scraped against the Persian rug. I stood at the end of the long table, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and my parents, feeling entirely exposed. "Give me the name of the man who did this," my father demanded. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble that he usually reserved for incompetent surgical residents. I lifted my chin. I refused to let my voice shake. "His name is Mason Hayes. He is an electrician. We are getting married." The reaction was not an explosion of rage, but something far worse. It was a collective sneer. A suffocating, contemptuous silence blanketed the room, broken only by a sharp, derisive scoff from my Aunt Cecilia, who was sitting to my right. She took a slow sip of her Cabernet before waving her manicured hand dismissively in the air. "An electrician," Cecilia said, rolling the word around in her mouth like it tasted foul. "He is going to drag this entire family down into the dirt with his construction dust-covered hands. It is completely absurd." My mother, Evelyn, did not join in the mocking. Instead, She reached down beside her chair and retrieved a thick, beige folder. She placed it squarely in the center of the table. Even then, she was always prepared with her paperwork. It was a comprehensive background check. She had hired a private investigator the moment she suspected I was seeing someone outside their approved social circles. Evelyn opened the file and began to read from it with the clinical detachment of someone reciting a grocery list. She listed Mason's perceived failures as if they were criminal offenses. He had a low annual income. He had attended a vocational trade school instead of a prestigious university. He lived with a single mother in a rented duplex on the wrong side of the highway. He was, in her exact words, completely devoid of any class appropriateness. To Evelyn, Mason was not a human being. He was a liability, a stain on the Whitmore pedigree. Grant held up a hand, stopping his wife's recitation. He looked at me, his eyes cold and dead. He delivered his ultimatum with surgical precision. "You have a choice to make tonight. Phoebe," my father said, "you will terminate this pregnancy tomorrow morning. You will get back on the right track, return to your university studies, and I will fully fund your continuing education as planned. We will erase this unfortunate mistake, but if you choose to keep that child, you will lose this family, immediately." The room held its breath. They expected me to break. They expected the 19-year-old girl who had never paid her own credit card bill to collapse under the weight of their financial power. "I choose the baby," I said, my voice ringing clear across the dining room. "And I choose Mason." My father did not blink. He simply nodded once. "Then you are done. Your trust fund is frozen as of this moment. I am cutting your finances. Your cellular phone plan is terminated. You are written out of the inheritance. Effective tonight. Get out of my house." I turned to my mother, hoping for a flicker of maternal instinct. Instead, Evelyn stood up, walked into the adjoining kitchen, and returned with 2 heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. She dropped them at my feet. Then, she summoned Maria, the housekeeper who had baked my birthday cakes for a decade, and ordered her to stand guard at my bedroom door while I packed. I was to be supervised like a fired servant, ensuring I did not steal any jewelry or family heirlooms on my way out. I walked up the grand staircase with my head held high. Though my vision blurred with hot tears, under Maria's tearful, apologetic gaze, I stuffed whatever clothes I could fit into the 2 garbage bags. I left the designer dresses, the pearls, the expensive shoes. I took only what I needed when I walked out of the heavy front doors. The oppressive heat of the day had broken into a torrential downpour. I stood on the massive circular driveway, the rain soaking through my silk dress. Dragging the heavy bags beside me, parked at the edge of the property, just beyond the wrought iron gates, was a battered, old pickup truck. The engine was idling rough. Mason was waiting. He had been waiting out there the entire time, parked in the rain. Knowing what I was facing inside, he saw me. He threw the driver door open and stepped out into the pouring rain. He did not wear a designer coat. He wore his faded canvas work jacket and heavy boots. He walked up to me, taking the 2 wet trash bags from my trembling hands and tossing them into the bed of the truck. He looked at my face. He saw the devastation, the red eyes, the soaked hair plastered to my cheeks. He did not ask what they had said. He did not ask how bad it was or if I had fought for my trust fund. He simply opened the passenger door for me, sheltered me from the rain with his broad body, and looked me dead in the eye. "I called the courthouse," Mason said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "We are getting married on Friday." I climbed into the worn fabric seat of the truck. The heater was blowing warm air, smelling faintly of motor oil and sawdust. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. As he put the truck in gear and drove me away from the only life I had ever known, I realized a fundamental truth that would shape the rest of my existence. That night, my family taught me what humiliation was. Mason taught me what dignity was. We got married on a Friday morning at the county courthouse. There was no string quartet, no catered reception, and no designer gown. My dress was bought off a clearance rack for $45. The air in the municipal building smelled of stale coffee, damp paper, and industrial floor wax. Our witnesses were two complete strangers: a bored filing clerk and an off-duty security guard who happened to be standing by the heavy wooden doors. We did not hire a professional photographer. We asked the clerk to take exactly one picture with a cheap disposable camera we had purchased at a pharmacy on the way there, in that single, slightly blurry photograph. Mason is wearing a borrowed blue tie that is slightly too short, and I am holding a small bouquet of grocery store daisies. We are smiling so intensely, it looks like our cheeks might crack. It is the only wedding photo we possess, framed in cheap plastic, and it still sits prominently on our bedside table. 3 months later, Delilah arrived into the world. The hospital room was small, cold, and entirely devoid of flowers or balloons. Holding her tiny, fragile weight against my chest for the very first time, a sudden, sharp ache of longing hit me. I stared at my prepaid cell phone resting on the rolling tray, the screen glowing weakly in the dim hospital lighting. I typed out a short, simple message to my mother. Just a few words to say she had a beautiful, healthy baby girl weighing 7 pounds and 4 ounces. I stared at the blinking cursor for 10 agonizing minutes, feeling the ghosts of my old life pulling at my resolve. Then, I deleted the message entirely and turned the phone off. I never sent it. I did not need to. 2 weeks later, a piece of mail arrived in our rusty mailbox, printed on heavy, expensive, embossed stationery. It was not a heartfelt letter from my mother, but a formal note from her executive assistant. The typed message was exactly 6 words long. Dr. Whitmore has no granddaughter. I tore the letter into tiny, jagged pieces and threw it in the trash can under the sink. That was the last time I allowed them to have any power over my emotions. We lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment situated directly above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. The radiator clanked aggressively all winter long, and the single-window unit air conditioner rattled so loudly all summer that we had to shout to hear each other. We survived on a diet of cheap pasta, staggered shifts, and sheer, stubborn willpower to avoid paying for expensive daycare. We handed Delilah off to each other at the front door like a precious baton in a never-ending relay race. Mason worked grueling 10-hour shifts on dusty commercial construction sites during the day. At night, he took under-the-table residential repair jobs, fixing broken ceiling fans and rewiring blown electrical panels for cash to keep the lights on. I worked the complete opposite schedule. While Delilah finally slept in her repurposed crib, I sat at our wobbly, scratched kitchen table under a harsh fluorescent bulb, taking online courses in accounting and internal controls. My brain, heavily honed by years of surviving my family's complex psychological chess games, found a deep, comforting rhythm in following exact paper trails. I liked the absolute, undeniable certainty of numbers. They did not lie, and they did not play favorites. I gradually transitioned my studies into forensic accounting, specializing heavily in invoice investigation and construction cost fraud. It took me 4 exhausting years of studying at 2 o'clock in the morning, running on black coffee and adrenaline, but I finally landed a junior position at Harbor Ledger Risk Group. It was a fierce private firm that specialized in auditing massive billing records, investigating complex construction projects, and identifying severe contract violations for large corporate organizations. My job was to find the hidden ghosts in the machine, the cleverly concealed discrepancies where millions of dollars were quietly siphoned away by corrupt contractors. I became exceptionally good at finding the lies. Powerful people thought they had successfully buried under mountains of paperwork. Delilah grew up in a home where money was always meticulously budgeted, but affection was completely unlimited. She was a fiercely intelligent, constantly curious child. By the time she was 7 years old, she vastly preferred sitting on the living room floor with Mason, learning the crucial difference between positive, negative, and neutral electrical wires. Rather than playing with standard toys, she loved taking broken appliances apart piece by piece, just to see exactly how the internal circuits connected. And when she sat beside me at the table, watching me highlight glaring discrepancies on massive, printed spreadsheets. She started asking sharp questions. She did not just ask what the numbers meant. She asked who exactly signed this specific paper and why the approval dates did not logically match the delivery logs. She was the perfect, terrifying blend of her father's practical mechanical genius and my relentless, unforgiving skepticism. When the housing market crashed, we took every single penny of our meager, hard-earned savings and bought a distressed, severely damaged foreclosed property on the far edge of town. The roof sagged dangerously, the ancient plumbing leaked behind the walls, and the exterior paint was peeling off in large strips. But the deed had our names on it. It was ours. Mason spent the next 3 years working on it every weekend and evening, tearing the decaying house down to its bare wooden bones and rebuilding it from the ground up. He completely rewired the entire electrical system with his own calloused hands, ensuring every circuit was flawless. He replaced the rusted pipes. He patched the crumbling drywall. That small house became our physical, undeniable testament to starting over. We built our permanent sanctuary directly out of the ruins of something someone else had completely abandoned. I maintained an ironclad, impenetrable boundary between our safe sanctuary and the toxic radiation of my past. I permanently blocked every phone number associated with my parents, their colleagues, and their staff. I actively memorized the city traffic map to ensure I never, ever drove through their upscale, manicured neighborhood. If a glossy magazine at the grocery store checkout lane featured a flattering profile on my father's latest cardiovascular surgery award, I casually flipped it over so the cover was hidden. I excised them from my daily reality with cold, surgical precision. Of course, Delilah knew she biologically had grandparents. She saw the other children at her elementary school being picked up by doting, affectionate grandmothers, and she naturally asked about ours. I never lied to her, but I also flatly refused to burden her innocent mind with the cruel, traumatic details of that final, humiliating dinner. I sat her down on our worn, comfortable couch, held her small, warm hands in mine, and told her a simple, undeniable truth. I told her that they simply did not want to be a family with us. So, we rolled up our sleeves and built our own family instead. She accepted this explanation with the profound, pragmatic wisdom that only resilient children possess. From that exact day forward, she never asked about them again. We had our own secure world, and its foundation was built on solid rock. 7 years before the current disaster, Mason took a commercial subcontract that he deliberately hid from me. He did not conceal it out of malice or deceit, but out of a fierce desire to protect our fragile peace. The project was a highly lucrative, multi-phase expansion for a major medical facility. He knew the name on the primary blueprints would send a shockwave through our home. It was the early construction phase of the new pediatric wing. He had accepted a highly specialized, isolated segment of the electrical grid. His intention was simple. He wanted to get in, execute his craft flawlessly, collect the contractor check, and walk away without my biological family ever knowing he had breathed the air on their property. But my husband is a man who treats his trade with a reverence bordering on religion. He reads architectural schematics and technical specifications with the same intense scrutiny I apply to audit trails. Midway through his contract, the primary engineering firm craned the massive automatic transfer switch into the sub-basement. The transfer switch is the literal heartbeat of any hospital emergency protocol. When the city grid dies, that switch acts as the brain, commanding the diesel backup generators to wake up and seamlessly routing the massive surge of electricity to keep the life support machines running. The original, approved blueprints mandated a specific, heavy-duty, hospital-grade unit designed to handle sudden, catastrophic thermal loads. What the installation crew unboxed on a Tuesday morning was a commercial-grade substitute. It was a cheaper model, manufactured by a lesser company, saving the project managers roughly 30% on the equipment line item. To a layman, it looked like a metal box. To a master electrician, it looked like a ticking time bomb. It was entirely inadequate for the sheer, demanding electrical draw of a modern neonatal intensive care unit. Mason absolutely refused to wire it into the main grid. He pulled out his camera and took high-resolution photographs of the serial numbers, making sure the metadata captured the exact date and location. He immediately drafted formal emails to the site director, the general contractor, and the chief engineering officer, explicitly documenting that the substituted equipment failed to meet the critical safety parameters for a pediatric ward. He went a step further. He submitted a formal, legally binding refusal of inspection form. By doing so, he legally blocked the construction crews from installing the drywall and closing the technical ceiling over that specific sector. 2 days later, the senior project manager cornered Mason inside a cramped, dusty temporary site trailer. The manager tried to play a dangerous game of leverage, offering a combination of veiled threats and lucrative bribes. He implied that if Mason simply signed the approval forms and played ball, Mason's small company would be permanently fast-tracked for 3 upcoming, massive municipal contracts if Mason insisted on causing a delay. His reputation in the city would become highly problematic. Mason did not flinch. I know exactly how he looked at the manager because my husband only possesses one singular gear when it comes to the safety of others. Mason looked the man dead in the eye and delivered a reality check. He told the manager that electricity does not care about corporate budget cuts, executive bonuses, or prestigious family names. Electricity does not listen to reasons, it only listens to the circuit. Less than 3 weeks later, Mason arrived at the perimeter fence and his security badge flashed red. He had been abruptly terminated. The official dismissal paperwork cited a fabricated failure to meet project scheduling timelines. They locked him out of the site immediately. Furthermore, they froze his final milestone payment, withholding a sum of nearly $15,000, which represented a massive financial blow to our carefully balanced household budget at the time. That evening, Mason sat at our kitchen table and finally confessed the location of the job. He placed a heavy, dust-covered external hard drive and a thick stack of printed daily logs onto the wood surface. I was initially furious that he had walked into the lion's den, but that anger was rapidly eclipsed by my razor-sharp professional instincts. We pushed our dinner plates aside and transformed the table into a forensic war room. I spent the next 48 hours meticulously organizing his handwritten daily logs, archiving the warning emails, and cross-referencing the time-stamped photographs of the faulty equipment. Because of my background in investigating corporate fraud, I knew exactly which municipal databases to query. I pulled the preliminary insurance compliance filings from the city registry. Deep within a 100-page document, I found the smoking gun. It was a scanned inspection form, officially authorizing the closure of the technical ceiling around the compromised transfer switch. At the bottom of the page, validating the installation as fully compliant with safety regulations, was Mason's signature. It was a remarkably bold forgery. The slant was close, but the terminal loop on the letter M was far too sharp, and the pressure of the pen stroke lacked his heavy-handed rhythm. He had never signed that document. Someone in the management chain had panicked, forged the approval, and buried the hazard behind a wall of fresh drywall. Every fiber of my being wanted to go to war. I wanted to march into the district attorney's office and drop the binder on their desk. But I sat down and ran the cold, unforgiving mathematics of our reality to fight a heavily insured corporate construction entity, backed by my family's seemingly endless legal fund, would require hundreds of thousands of dollars in retainer fees. We had a young, dependent daughter. We had a 30-year mortgage on a house we were rebuilding by hand. A protracted legal battle would completely bankrupt us within 6 months. I looked at Mason, my heart breaking, and told him we had to swallow the injustice. We could not afford to fight them. Mason accepted the harsh reality, but his shoulders slumped with a heavy, profound dread. He sat on the edge of our mattress that night, staring blankly at the floor. He spoke a single sentence that would haunt me for years. He said that someday, that system was going to blow, and he just hoped no one would get hurt when the lights finally went out. The next morning, I gathered every single piece of paper, every digital storage drive, and every printed email. I packed them carefully into a heavy-duty, moisture-proof polymer document safe. I snapped the industrial latches shut, taking a thick, permanent black marker. I wrote a label across the top of the box in my standard, emotionless administrative style, Whitmore Pavilion - do not destroy. I pushed the box into the deepest, darkest corner of our attic, burying it beneath old winter coats, waiting for the day the past would finally catch fire, while I was locking the doors of our dark house. A very different scene had unfolded across the city exactly 1 hour earlier. The Whitmore Children's Pavilion was not just operating as a hospital that night. The ground floor atrium was the venue for their lavish annual fundraising gala. Hundreds of wealthy donors, elite surgeons, and local journalists were drinking champagne under crystal chandeliers, celebrating the supposed state-of-the-art safety of the new wing. Then, the superstorm collapsed the city grid. A massive substation blew out, plunging the entire medical district into absolute darkness. In a proper, legally compliant medical facility, the blackout should have been a minor inconvenience. The emergency generators are designed to sense the drop in voltage and automatically transfer the power load within exactly 10 seconds. But the automated transfer switch in the new pediatric wing did not fire. The heavy, reassuring hum of diesel engines never reached the upper floors. The hallway lights merely flickered and died completely. In the neonatal intensive care unit and the pediatric surgical recovery wards, the primary power flatlined. There was no chaotic violence, and the medical staff did not break down. The nurses and on-duty doctors reacted with terrifying speed. Relying on rigorous training, they manually pumped oxygen bags. They moved vulnerable patients to the older, adjacent wings that still had functional emergency power, but the internal battery backups on the life support machines only carried a finite charge of maybe 45 minutes. The situation was rapidly escalating from a critical emergency into a catastrophic failure. Mason was never supposed to be anywhere near that building. He was working an emergency call 2 blocks away, restoring a flooded basement panel for a commercial high-rise. But a frantic maintenance manager from the hospital, a man who vividly remembered Mason from the original construction crew 7 years ago, ran through the pouring rain to find him. The hospital's internal engineering team was panicking. The automated switch was completely locked out, and they did not understand the architecture of that specific bypass. Mason did not hesitate. He sprinted 2 blocks through the storm, his heavy tool belt slung over his shoulder. When he breached the hospital sub-basement, he did not just hack into the wires like a reckless cowboy. He assessed the catastrophic failure with the cold, calculating mind of a master electrician. He worked directly with the panicked on-duty engineers. He correctly identified that the cheap, commercial-grade logic board had completely melted under the massive thermal load, using heavy-duty insulated gloves. He coordinated a highly dangerous, fully manual mechanical bypass, forcing the massive generator current to bridge over to the critical care circuit safely. He restored the power grid section by section, starting with the neonatal unit. What Mason did not know was that a freelance journalist, who had been attending the gala upstairs, had followed the panicked maintenance crew down into the basement stairwell. The journalist held up a smartphone, capturing the entire ordeal in the harsh glare of a tactical flashlight. The footage showed the wealthy, tuxedo-clad hospital executives hovering uselessly in the background while a man in a soaking wet canvas jacket and work boots barked highly technical commands, physically forcing the hospital back to life. The journalist uploaded the raw video directly to a major social media platform. The chosen caption was guaranteed to ignite an absolute firestorm. Electrician saves children's wing. While VIPs panic, the internet moves with a terrifying, predatory speed. Within exactly 20 minutes of the upload, amateur sleuths and aggressive local reporters had stripped the anonymity from the video. They identified the logo on Mason's shirt. They found his business license. Then, the real avalanche began. Some ambitious blogger dug into municipal public records and unearthed our marriage certificate. They connected Mason Hayes to Phoebe Hayes. They connected Phoebe Hayes to her maiden name. Suddenly, the narrative violently shifted. It was no longer just a story about a brave blue-collar worker saving the day. It transformed instantly into a massive, explosive scandal of class warfare, medical ethics, and deep-seated family drama. The disowned, disgraced daughter's husband had just saved the multi-million-dollar legacy of the very people who had thrown her out like garbage 19 years ago. Back in our hallway, Delilah was staring at her phone in absolute horror. Her screen was lighting up with dozens of messages every single second. Group chats from her university were melting down. Half of her classmates were sending strings of shocked text messages, calling her father an absolute legend and a hero. But the other half of the internet was already turning toxic. A coordinated wave of anonymous accounts began flooding the comment sections with a vicious smear campaign. They speculated wildly that Mason had intentionally caused the blackout. They theorized he had sabotaged the grid as an act of long-term, calculated revenge against the Whitmore family. Using the storm as a convenient cover, they were trying to frame the man who saved them as the criminal who attacked them. I stepped away from the front window and walked over to my laptop on the kitchen island. I pulled up a high-definition, uncompressed version of the basement video that a news affiliate had just posted. I maximized the screen. I ignored my husband's exhausted, soot-stained face and focused entirely on the massive gray metal cabinet he was working inside. I paused the video. I enhanced the contrast and zoomed in heavily on the manufacturer's embossed metal plate riveted to the side of the housing. I read the alphanumeric serial code out loud to myself in the dark kitchen. My blood ran completely cold. It was the exact sequence. It was the precise model number recorded in the forensic ledger locked inside the waterproof box in our attic. This was not a random act of God or an unfortunate malfunction caused by a storm. The hospital administration had deliberately chosen to leave that substandard, lethal piece of equipment inside the walls for 7 whole years, gambling with children's lives just to protect their financial bottom line. The bomb Mason had warned them about had finally detonated, and now they were going to try to blame him for the explosion. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the front door open. The storm whipped across the porch, blowing a fine mist of rain into our entryway. Standing under the flickering yellow glow of the street lamp was Dr. Evelyn Whitmore. She looked smaller than I remembered, though her posture was still rigidly straight. Her expensive wool trench coat was completely soaked, and her normally immaculate hair was plastered to her cheeks. She was clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest, treating it like a shield. "Phoebe," she said. Her voice trembled. It was a perfectly calculated waiver, designed to project vulnerability. "Let me come inside." I did not move an inch. I kept my body firmly planted in the doorway, blocking her path. "You have exactly 1 minute to tell me why you are standing on my porch after 19 years. Evelyn glanced nervously over my shoulder, peering into the dark house. "I came because of Delilah. The media is hounding her. The press is ruthless. Phoebe, I am terrified for my granddaughter. They will tear her apart if we do not get ahead of this story." It was a masterful performance. She invoked the name of a grandchild she had explicitly disowned on heavy stationery nearly 2 decades ago. She wore the mask of a deeply concerned matriarch, but my forensic mind stripped the emotion away and analyzed the exact words she chose. In her entire opening statement, the word sorry was noticeably absent. There was no apology for the cruel dinner, no regret for the silence, and no remorse for the pain. She was just managing a crisis. Before I could dissect her hypocrisy out loud, the floorboards creaked softly behind me. Mason materialized from the shadows of the hallway. He had just returned from the hospital basement a short while ago. Having parked his truck in the alley to avoid the news vans, he was still wearing his damp work clothes, smelling of ozone, diesel fuel, and burnt copper. He did not say a single word. He simply placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder and stood beside me. Evelyn physically recoiled. Her eyes darted to Mason, and for a fraction of a second, her polished veneer cracked. She was suddenly forced to stand face to face with the blue-collar worker she had once confidently labeled a catastrophic mistake. The man who had just waded into the dark to save the very hospital bearing her prestigious name. She swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. "Mason," Evelyn said, forcing a tight, unnatural smile. "We are incredibly grateful for your swift actions tonight. The board of directors is preparing a massive public thank you, but the narrative is getting entirely out of hand. People are looking for someone to blame for the initial failure." She unclasped her frozen fingers from the envelope and pulled out a stack of crisp, legal documents. She held them out toward us. "The hospital attorneys have drafted a standard public statement," Evelyn explained, her tone shifting back to the authoritative executive I remembered. "It simply requires Mason to officially confirm that he was never involved in the core electrical installation of the new wing. It states that he only worked on peripheral lighting and that he never submitted any formal safety warnings regarding the primary transfer switch. It puts the blame squarely on the bankrupt general contractor, where it belongs. She was asking him to commit perjury. She was asking the man who had warned them about the lethal hazard to sign a legally binding document erasing his own integrity. "And what exactly is the purchase price for our integrity?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Evelyn did not flinch at the accusation. She leaned in closer, dropping the grandmother act completely. "If you sign this tonight, the Whitmore Foundation will immediately establish a fully funded educational trust for Delilah. We will cover all 4 years of her university tuition, her housing, and any postgraduate degree she pursues. Furthermore, we will pay any legal retainers you might need to handle this media circus. We want to pave the way for a real reconciliation. We want to bring you all back into the family fold." It was a staggering bribe. Hundreds of thousands of dollars wrapped up in a toxic bow of fake family unity. I stared directly into her desperate, calculating eyes. "Let me ask you a very simple question. Mother, are you asking my husband to lie to save the children in that hospital? Or are you asking him to lie to save the Whitmore name?" Evelyn tightened her jaw. She refused to answer the question directly. Instead, the sheer panic of the situation caused her to make a catastrophic, unforced error. "You do not understand the stakes, Phoebe," Evelyn hissed, leaning forward until I could smell the stale coffee on her breath. "If that specific email gets out to the public, Grant will lose his medical license immediately. The state medical board will strip him of everything. The entire charitable foundation will face a massive federal investigation for gross negligence and fraud. We will lose the hospital. We will lose everything." The air in the porch seemed to freeze. Mason's hand tightened on my shoulder. She knew. My mind raced through the implications with terrifying speed. We had never told a single soul about the warning email Mason had sent 7 years ago. We had buried it in the attic. The only way Evelyn could possibly know about the existence of that specific email was if she had been actively involved in suppressing it back then. She was not just a bystander protecting her husband's legacy. She was a co-conspirator in the cover-up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a slight movement in the dark hallway. Delilah was standing just a few feet away, partially hidden by the coat rack. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the faint light from the street. She had heard every single word. The illusion was permanently shattered. She witnessed firsthand that the grand, sweeping gesture of family affection her grandmother was offering was nothing more than a desperate, expensive gag order. I slowly reached my hand into the deep pocket of my cardigan. My fingers found the smooth glass of my smartphone, using pure muscle memory. I blindly swiped the screen, opened the voice recording application, and firmly pressed the capture button. I needed to ensure whatever she said next was permanently etched into the digital record. "We are not signing anything," I said, my voice projecting loud and clear into the stormy night. "You did not come here to reconcile. You came here to buy an alibi. Take your envelope, Evelyn. Take your money. Get off my porch." Evelyn stared at me, her face pale and twisted with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. She realized she had played her final card and lost completely. She shoved the papers back into the envelope, turned on her heel, and walked back out into the pouring rain without another word. I watched her luxury sedan speed away into the dark. Then, I pulled my phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. The war had officially begun. As soon as the taillights of my mother's car disappeared into the storm, I locked the front door and turned to my family. We did not need to have a long conversation about what to do next. The battle lines were drawn. I walked straight to the hallway closet, pulled down the folding ladder, and climbed up into the dusty, suffocating air of the attic. I dragged out the heavy polymer document safe I had hidden away 7 years ago. I carried it down the stairs and dropped it right in the center of our dining room table. We immediately transformed our small dining area into a forensic war room. We pushed the placemats and salt shakers aside. Mason brought out his heavy-duty work laptop and his external hard drives. I booted up my own workstation. Loading the specialized auditing software I use daily at Harbor Ledger, Delilah sat between us, opening a fresh spreadsheet and a digital whiteboard on her tablet. The air was thick with the smell of brewing coffee and raw, nervous energy. Mason went straight for the physical evidence. He dug through the polymer box until he found a stack of small, grease-stained spiral notebooks. These were his personal daily logs, the handwritten records he kept meticulously on every single job site. He flipped through the crinkled pages until he found the entries from the hospital expansion project. There, written in his sharp, blocky handwriting, was the exact make, model, and serial number of the cheap transfer switch they had forced him to wire. He had also documented the full name of the supervising engineer on duty and the precise date he had submitted his formal safety warning. The serial number in his notebook matched the alphanumeric code I had pulled from the viral video perfectly. While Mason organized his physical logs, I went after the digital ghost. I opened the scanned inspection file, the one bearing the forged signature that had authorized the closing of the technical ceiling. I ran the file through a metadata extraction program. The results popped up on my screen in bright, undeniable text. The digital timestamp embedded deep within the creation code of the document showed it had been generated exactly 4 days after Mason had his security badge deactivated. It was absolute, irrefutable proof of a cover-up. They had fired him, realized they needed a master electrician's sign-off for the insurance underwriters, and simply forged his name after he was already gone. Delilah, leaning heavily into her university studies in data journalism and communications, took charge of the public narrative. She began aggressively scraping the internet for every press release, financial report, and news article related to the hospital expansion from that specific year. She was looking for a motive. Why were they so desperate to close the ceiling and ignore a critical safety hazard? Within 2 hours, she found it. She mapped out a timeline showing that the Whitmore Foundation had been aggressively pursuing a massive, multi-million-dollar federal healthcare grant. The absolute deadline to qualify for that specific grant required the new pediatric wing to be officially certified as operational by the first week of November. Fixing the electrical system properly would have caused a delay of at least 6 weeks, costing them the federal funding entirely. But the biggest, most sickening twist came when I started cross-referencing the hospital's public tax filings with the construction invoices. I traced the money flowing out of the charitable foundation run by Evelyn. I found a massive, highly irregular financial transfer directed to the general contractor who had deliberately swapped the heavy-duty transfer switch for the cheaper model. The payment was not categorized under construction costs. It was cleverly disguised under a vague, untraceable budget line labeled as value optimization. I sat back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. This was no longer just a story about a greedy contractor cutting corners or a hospital administration turning a blind eye to a technical error. My mother's charitable foundation had actively paid the contractor a financial incentive to install the cheaper, dangerous equipment. And then they had likely pocketed the surplus budget to inflate the foundation's administrative accounts. This was not negligence, it was wire fraud, false insurance reporting, and a massive deception aimed at the wealthy donors who thought they were funding a state-of-the-art pediatric ward. Suddenly, Delilah's tablet chimed with a secure, encrypted message notification. She opened it and gasped. An anonymous user, claiming to be a former administrative assistant who had worked in the hospital's executive office 7 years ago, had found Delilah's profile on a social media platform. The message was brief but explosive. The informant stated that there had been an emergency board meeting called the exact morning after Mason sent his warning email. Mason's name and his refusal to sign the forms were fiercely debated, but, the informant noted, when the official minutes of that meeting were filed into the corporate archive a week later, all mentions of the electrical hazard and Mason's warnings had been completely scrubbed from the record. Delilah looked up, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. She wanted to take screenshots of the metadata, the forged signature, and the anonymous message, and blast them across every single media outlet immediately. She wanted to burn their reputation to the ground before the sun came up. I reached across the table and gently closed her tablet. I explained the harsh reality of corporate warfare if we went straight to the press. The Whitmore public relations machine would instantly spin the narrative. They would paint me as the bitter, estranged daughter executing a coordinated personal vendetta against a respected medical institution. They would call the documents fake. We needed a fortress, not just a weapon. I chose to hold our fire. We needed to secure professional legal counsel and build an airtight, undeniable chain of evidence before we launched our strike. Just as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the living room windows, my laptop emitted a sharp, authoritative ping. An email had just bypassed my spam filter, marked with high-priority flags. I opened the message. It was a formal, aggressively worded, cease and desist order sent directly from the ruthless corporate law firm representing the Whitmore Hospital Network. The legal document demanded that Mason permanently refrain from making any public statements regarding the electrical failure. It explicitly threatened us with a catastrophic defamation lawsuit, promising to sue us into absolute bankruptcy if we dared to spread false information about my family's pristine legacy. They thought they were intimidating a quiet, broken family. They did not realize they had just handed us the exact map we needed to destroy them. By the time the sun fully breached the horizon, the narrative had violently fractured. The morning news broadcasts were a chaotic split screen. On the left side, independent commentators and local citizens were hailing my husband as the working-class savior who stepped into the void when the billionaires panicked. But on the right side, the Whitmore public relations machine had quietly deployed its most lethal weapons. Well-dressed anchors began citing anonymous hospital insiders. These invisible sources painted Mason not as a hero, but as a disgruntled former subcontractor. They leaked the heavily redacted termination file from 7 years ago, claiming he had been aggressively fired for missing crucial deadlines and was carrying a toxic, long-standing grudge against the facility. Then, the true character assassination began. An anonymous social media account posted a grainy, digitized photograph. My heart stopped when I saw it on the screen. It was a picture of me, 19 years old, standing on the edge of the Whitmore estate in the pouring rain with 2 black garbage bags at my feet. Someone inside that house had taken a picture of my lowest moment and kept it. The caption framed me as the bitter, estranged daughter who had spent nearly 2 decades orchestrating a complex revenge plot against her own flesh and blood. They were deliberately digging through the deepest, most painful archives of my life to destroy my credibility before I could even speak. The digital assault quickly breached the physical world. Just before noon, Delilah attempted to walk across her university campus to attend her communications lecture. A pack of freelance reporters ambushed her right outside the science building. They shoved microphones into her face, screaming questions about her grandfather's wealth and her father's alleged sabotage. She called me from a locked campus bathroom, her voice shaking with panic. I drove straight to the university, pulled her into my car, and laid down an absolute, unbreakable rule. We would not speak a single syllable to the press without legal representation. I refused to let my daughter become raw meat for the media grinders. I needed a gladiator, not just a lawyer. I bypassed the massive corporate law firms that regularly golfed with my father. Instead, I called Hannah Price. She was a fiercely independent civil litigator known for tearing apart corporate monopolies. And she brought along a retired state investigator to ensure our digital evidence was preserved with a flawless chain of custody. When they arrived at our house and reviewed the contents of our makeshift command center, Hannah did not blink. She laid her hands flat on the table and declared that we possessed the ammunition for a massive three-front war. We were going to launch a brutal defamation lawsuit to clear Mason's name, submit our financial analysis to the federal authorities investigating contract fraud, and prepare a devastating dossier for the State Medical Licensing Board, in the middle of mapping out our legal strategy. My phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. The syntax was overly formal, demanding a private, immediate meeting at a neutral location. It was Grant Whitmore, my father. I showed the screen to Hannah. She nodded, instructing me to keep the line open but entirely non-committal. Over the next 2 hours, my father grew increasingly desperate, sending a barrage of messages that unraveled his polished facade. He explicitly blamed the entire electrical failure on the general contractor, but the true twist came when he mentioned the financial discrepancies I had not even publicly accused them of yet. He claimed that Evelyn had completely overstepped her authority. He wrote that my mother had acted entirely alone in redirecting the foundation funds to that specific contractor, masking it as a routine budget optimization. The united front of the Whitmore empire was cracking. They were beginning to turn on each other to survive the scandal. I did not trust a single word my father typed, but I knew the value of his panic. I replied with short, vague answers, intentionally stringing him along to force him to put more of his paranoid confessions into writing. Later that evening, Mason stood by the kitchen sink, staring out into the dark backyard. His broad shoulders carried a heavy, visible burden. He turned to me and confessed his deep hesitation. He said he just wanted to fix the lights and protect our home. He did not want to be the reason an entire hospital collapsed. And he certainly did not want to actively ruin anyone's life, even the people who had treated us like dirt. I walked over and placed both of my hands squarely on his chest. I looked up into his tired eyes and delivered the cold, hard truth. I reminded him that they had drawn the first blood 19 years ago when they tried to erase his existence. They tried to ruin him again 7 years ago when they forged his signature on a lethal document. And now, they were perfectly willing to throw our 19-year-old daughter to a pack of rabid reporters just to buy themselves another day of good press. They were not victims. They were predators, and we were finally holding the cage. My words cemented his resolve. The hesitation vanished from his eyes, replaced by the same fierce, unyielding determination he used to face down a live electrical panel. Just before midnight, my phone rang. It was Hannah. Her voice was sharp, vibrating with pure adrenaline. The state authorities had officially stepped in. The State Medical Safety Board had just announced an emergency. Mandatory hearing regarding the catastrophic power failure at the pavilion. It was no longer a matter of public opinion. It was a formal, legal tribunal. Hannah told us to pack up every single piece of paper, every hard drive, and every printed photograph. We had exactly 72 hours to submit our entire arsenal of technical and financial evidence to the board. The final countdown had officially begun. Hannah and I sat at the dining room table, staring at the mountain of evidence. We had enough ammunition to level the entire Whitmore legacy, but Hannah was a master tactician. She knew that if we dumped everything onto the board's desk at once, the hospital's massive legal team would find a way to bury it in procedural motions. We chose a strategy of cold restraint. We submitted just a fraction of our hand. We handed over Mason's initial warning logs and the photographs of the substandard equipment. It was exactly enough to force the medical board to issue a preliminary injunction, legally blocking the hospital from pinning the blackout on my husband before the hearing even began. Across the table, Delilah had transformed her digital notes into a lethal, undeniable timeline. She mapped it out on a large poster board, tracing the exact sequence of their corruption. It started with Mason's written warning. That warning was immediately followed by the hospital quietly swapping the equipment to save money. 2 months later, the Whitmore Foundation released a massive public relations campaign, boasting to their wealthy donors that the new wing was the gold standard of pediatric care. Years passed, leading straight into the devastating power outage. The timeline ended perfectly with Evelyn standing on our porch, offering hundreds of thousands of dollars in hush money, Our case grew exponentially stronger when Delilah's anonymous informant finally agreed to step out of the shadows. He was a retired technical records manager who had spent 2 decades at the hospital. Sitting in our living room, drinking black tea, he confirmed our worst suspicions. He confessed that the morning after Mason refused to sign the safety approvals, the executive office ordered him to alter the official meeting minutes. He was explicitly instructed to delete the phrase safety delay and replace it with supply chain delay. It was a calculated, deliberate erasure of the truth. Then, Mason dropped a seemingly insignificant detail that changed the entire trajectory of our legal war. He was staring at his old work boots by the door, rubbing his jaw. He remembered the exact day they confiscated his security badge and threw him off the construction site. The project management office had stopped answering his calls. So he did something desperate. He bypassed the hierarchy and called Evelyn Whitmore's direct personal cellular line. She did not answer, so he left a highly detailed voicemail directly on her phone, explicitly warning her that the substitute transfer switch was a fatal fire hazard for the pediatric ward. Hannah practically leaped out of her chair. If the telecommunications provider still retained a legal server backup from 7 years ago, that audio file was direct, irrefutable proof of Evelyn's personal knowledge. Hannah drafted an emergency data preservation order within 20 minutes. She filed it directly with a federal judge, targeting both the cellular provider and the hospital's internal email servers. The reaction from the Whitmore legal camp was explosive. They fought the subpoena with a ferocity that bordered on sheer panic. They filed motion after motion, claiming executive privilege and patient confidentiality, but their aggressive resistance severely backfired. Their desperation convinced the judge that risk of destruction/deletion of digital evidence. The judge did not just grant our subpoena, he issued an immediate, temporary seal on the entire executive email network of the hospital, locking them out of their own servers to prevent any further deletion of records. While the lawyers warred in the courts, my phone continued to ring. It was my father. Grant Whitmore was unraveling rapidly. His voicemails were no longer arrogant or commanding. They were frantic, breathless recordings of a man watching his empire crumble. In his 4th message, his voice cracked as he admitted that he had personally signed the final safety acceptance paper, but even in his panic, he refused to shoulder the blame. He claimed he only signed it because the project management team assured him the hazard had been mitigated. Listening to his pathetic excuses, a massive moral twist crystallized in my mind. For 19 years, I had viewed my father as the cold, unforgiving tyrant of the family. He was certainly weak, arrogant, and cowardly, but the true architect of this disaster, the ruthless coordinator who had actively managed the cover-up, manipulated the foundation funds, and offered the hush money, was the woman who had spent her entire career playing the compassionate, philanthropic doctor. Evelyn was the mastermind. The night before the emergency hearing, the doorbell rang. The storm had passed, leaving the night air bitterly cold and completely still. I opened the door. Evelyn stood on the porch for the 2nd time. She wore a sharp black suit, and her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. There was no envelope of money this time. There was no fake grandmotherly concern. She had come to deliver a threat. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that if I dared to play the audio recording of our previous porch conversation in front of the medical board, she would unleash hell on my family. She promised to hire the most vicious media crisis firms in the country. She swore she would drag Delilah into a highly public, agonizing media dispute that would shadow her for years, ruining her academic career before it even started. Evelyn was promising to destroy my daughter to save herself. I did not yell. I did not blink. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. I stepped back and slammed the heavy wooden door shut, locking the deadbolt right in her face. I walked back into the kitchen, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs, just as I poured myself a glass of water. My cellular phone vibrated on the marble counter. The caller identification displayed Hannah's name. I answered the call, pressing the speaker against my ear. Hannah did not bother saying hello. Her breath was hitching with the thrill of the kill. She told me that the Federal Data Preservation Order had just returned its initial results from the telecommunications vault. They found it. They had successfully retrieved the audio file of Mason's voicemail. But that was not all. Cross-referencing the timestamp of the voicemail against the sealed hospital servers, Hannah's forensic team had just uncovered a heavily encrypted chain of internal executive emails. They were emails sent on the exact same day, directly ordering the permanent deletion of Mason's warnings from the system. We had them. We had every single piece of the puzzle, and tomorrow, we were going to burn their legacy to the ground. The State Medical Safety Board hearing convened at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. The Grand Administrative Chamber was packed wall to wall with local reporters, national correspondents, and furious hospital donors. The air was suffocating, thick with the flash of cameras and the low murmur of impending scandal. On the far side of the mahogany room sat my parents, Dr. Grant Whitmore and Dr. Evelyn Whitmore, surrounded by a small army of corporate attorneys. They looked perfectly composed, dressed in their absolute best, entirely ready to sacrifice my husband to save their empire. The lead attorney for the hospital opened their defense with a vicious, calculated strike. He stood before the regulatory panel and attempted to frame Mason not as a savior, but as an opportunistic saboteur. He suggested that Mason's actions during the blackout were completely unauthorized interference. He spun a wild narrative that Mason had rushed into the hospital's sub-basement during the storm simply to play the hero, implying that his unauthorized meddling might have actually worsened the grid failure. Hannah Price did not even stand up right away. She simply pushed a heavy stack of certified maintenance logs across the table and called the hospital's own on duty engineering supervisor to the microphone. The supervisor, a man who looked like he had not slept in 3 days, completely shattered the hospital's opening statement. He testified under oath that the internal automated systems had completely locked them out and that he had actively sent a crew out into the storm to beg Mason for help because they knew Mason possessed the expertise to bypass the melted logic board. With the sabotage theory dead on arrival, it was my turn to take the stand. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single ounce of 19-year-old anger bleed into my testimony. I operated with the cold, surgical precision of a forensic auditor. I walked the medical board through the exact timeline of the corruption. I presented the forged signature on the technical sealing closure forms. I submitted the sworn affidavit from the retired records manager, proving the board minutes had been deliberately altered to hide the electrical hazard. I laid out the financial documents showing how my mother's charitable foundation had redirected safety funds into untraceable budget optimization accounts. The hospital's attorneys fiercely objected, claiming the documents were circumstantial. But Hannah was already preparing our lethal blow. After a brief but intense legal argument regarding single-party consent laws in our state, the panel granted Hannah permission to play the audio recording I had captured on my front porch. The chamber went completely silent as Evelyn's voice echoed through the room. The board members listened to her explicitly admit her terror over the buried warning email. They heard her desperate attempt to purchase our silence, offering to pay for Delilah's entire university education in exchange for Mason signing a perjured statement. Delilah, sitting in the gallery behind us, was finally vindicated in front of the entire city. No one could ever accuse my daughter of being the motivation for a family vendetta. Evelyn's face turned the color of ash, but Hannah was not finished. "That is how they attempted to cover it up 2 days ago," Hannah announced, her voice ringing clear across the room. "Now, let the record show exactly what they were trying to hide for 7 years." Hannah pressed a button on her laptop. The recovered audio file from the telecommunications vault played over the speakers. It was Mason, his voice younger but just as firm, leaving a voicemail directly on Evelyn's personal phone line 7 years ago. He explicitly warned her that the commercial-grade transfer switch was a catastrophic fire hazard for the pediatric ward. He outlined the exact thermal failure that ultimately occurred during the storm, before the hospital lawyers could even formulate an objection. Hannah projected a single, recovered internal email onto the massive screen behind the panel. It was sent from Evelyn's secure executive account to the senior project manager. Heavily time-stamped just 3 hours after Mason had left that voicemail. The text on the screen was undeniable. Open on schedule. Replace discussion with supply issue. Do not loop in haze again. The entire room erupted. It was the ultimate smoking gun. It proved absolute, intentional concealment of a lethal hazard to secure federal funding. In a pathetic, desperate attempt to save his medical license, Grant Whitmore stood up and grabbed his microphone. He began stammering, publicly throwing his wife under the bus. He claimed he was just a surgeon, that he did not know everything, and that Evelyn had handled all the foundation logistics behind his back. But Hannah calmly pulled up the final set of foundation authorization documents. Both of their signatures were proudly displayed on the bottom line, authorizing the massive budget cuts that led to the compromised equipment. The Whitmore power couple collapsed on live television, destroyed by their own paperwork. The regulatory board did not deliberate long. They immediately suspended Grant and Evelyn from all executive and medical roles within the hospital network. They formally transferred the entire dossier to the state prosecutor's office to initiate criminal investigations for wire fraud, insurance deception, and severe public endangerment. Mason was completely and publicly exonerated. In the weeks that followed, the hospital's insurance conglomerate settled our defamation lawsuit out of court for a massive sum. Desperate to keep the remaining details out of the press, I did not accept a single penny of reconciliation money or inheritance from my parents. Their wealth was poisoned. Instead, Mason and I took the defamation settlement and established a completely independent trust. We created a fund that provides heavy-duty, safe electrical upgrades for low-income housing in our city, ensuring no family has to live with dangerous wiring. We used the rest to establish a massive scholarship program at the local vocational trade school, specifically designed to fully fund the education of young, struggling parents. They believed honor came from a name. I learned that honor comes from what you do when no one is looking. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Where are you currently tuning in from to hear this story? Please let me know down in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Please remember to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by hitting the notification bell so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.